Raspy's multimedia content generation blitz up to a live vote, which is a very exciting and much anticipated proposal. And we've got the advertising and kind of like content promotion push for Gamescom in Germany. And yeah, it's been an interesting week. So we've got a lot of things happening in terms of both infrastructure, setting up back end things like multi-sigs so we can make Iris Bounty work. That's happening now. All the council members are getting their individual wallet addresses and information to the team for setting up the multi-sig. Bodhi's been doing back-end payment stuff and KYC things for individual people that we're paying out, and there's now a live channel for that. So pretty much if you wind up getting approved for payments, you're going to go into this special access chat. It's pretty much there just for your purposes. And we'll have it for all of your information for the payments so we can coordinate when we're going to send things to you, what address we're sending it to, etc. And then just after it's all coordinated and you've been paid, you just lose access to the chat. But yeah, exciting week in Star Atlas governance. I apologize. Our usual people with the slideshows, and things like that weren't here. But with that, I'll pass it over to Bodhi, and depending on what he has, we can kind of just open it up into council office hours early. If anyone has topics, things they want to discuss, or things they want to push.
Yeah, we just had our meeting yesterday, so basically covered all that I needed to talk about there. So yeah, not really much on the docket right now. I was kind of hoping to have a PIP to review, but it's been a little slow going on that front.
Yeah, so you want to take people through what you've been setting up for like KYCs and payments?
Yeah, basically just it's kind of twofold. Like number one, streamlining the whole payment system. It's it's not overly complicated, but if you make a mistake, it's it's an area where you can't really make a mistake. So best to just have it dialed in super good. But then also it can get complicated if you have a lot of pips. So it's good to kind of do that before it does get complicated. If you're juggling a handful of different pips and different pace payment schedules, and it's nice to have a not only a system but kind of have like a habit of doing that. But then so that's one aspect, and then the other aspect is there's just a ton of different ways that it can go wrong, like either just honest mistakes or even nefarious things, like there's just a ton of different ways that you can it's similar to like an OTC, like we have KYC so that we know kind of who they are, but at the same time, like we're sending money over the blockchain, right? Like directly to their wallet. So there's just a level of there's a lot of different ways that can go wrong. So kind of anticipating all those different avenues where something could fall through the cracks and plugging those holes before anything ever does fall through. Just kind of trying to cover both those bases. And then it's kind of a balance between the two, because you can be like overly cautious to the point of where it's like you're definitely gonna get scammed. Like you're super safe, but then you're like also redundantly checking things. So it's kind of trying to find the balance to where it's like streamlined but erring on the side of caution. That's basically it. A little bit more complicated than I thought. I tend to do a lot of those things naturally on my, just over the years, I've just gotten my own rhythm. So writing it down on paper to like standardize those methods and actually write it all out, it's kind of funny how like complicated that process is, because it's kind of like, imagine if you had to write down like how to put on a shirt. You just tell somebody, "Oh, put on your shirt," but then when you actually have to like write it in words, it's like actually kind of complicated to explain.
No, it's
So
funny, and it depends on people's skill sets and personality types. So like I'm like very intuitive. I'm not very good. I'm not the person you would want if you wanted someone to create a bunch of structure or a very orderly rule-based process. I'm much more kind of like reflexive and intuitive, and just I come up with things and just do them. So it's I totally get that. There's all kinds of things that I do every day that once I have to like codify them or break it out so it's a system that other people can follow, it becomes a totally different type of challenge.
Can
yeah,
I
it's
ask a
more like
question?
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, first, so you set up a multi-sig node body, or does one council member use this, or you get the funds from the DAO and then send it to somebody else? How does the process work?
Yeah, so we basically have a channel in Discord, and that channel is visible by all the council members and the mod team as well. And lastly, the automata team, right? So those three parties can view the channel and type there technically, but generally only the council would be typing there. And then pretty much what it is, it's a landing page. So it's just a channel, a normal channel, but it's read only. So you show up at the channel and it just has one message that goes over every single detail that you would need, what to expect, just everything. And that will incorporate more information as we learn as we go, right? So it's got like the foundation's email, what kind of documents you're going to need, if you need to KYC, um, all of it, everything basically. And then in that channel, we use private threads. So that way that channel stays really clean. But then within that channel, there's private threads, which is a pretty nifty tool that Discord has, which basically allows us to, it's kind of similar to the forum style, but the problem with the forum style is it doesn't really give you a good like landing page. It kind of breaks everything up equally instead of having like a central page and then like offshoots from there. So the threads kind of make that main landing page that everybody gets to see, and then you got the offshoots from there. And each private channel is made for each author, and that way the authors have a spot where they can. Well, the author has a spot where he can communicate with the council or the team or whoever, and we can have that back and forth conversation. But it's private between one author and another. So that way that channel can exist and continue to scale, and people won't be able to like look back and if you're an author coming in getting funded, you're not going to be able to like see other people's all the channels. And it also kind of makes it nice so that it's just that main landing page and your private thread. So it kind of keeps those important details right up front and center. And then from there, we basically figure out if we need a KYC. So the team, lets us know. We don't really have a specific number on when a KYC is needed. So right now it's just up to their discretion, and they tell us they need a KYC. If they do, then they have, the email address. They send the documents over to the foundation. And that's nice because then we're not sending the email address. It's on a channel within Discord, right? So that helps. After they send the KYC, then the foundation gets back to us and says, okay, the KYC is completed. And then the council basically, well, myself, unless I'm not available, will basically do the calculate. Well, so I'll reach out to the author at that point, ask them to send me the address that they want to send the money to. So they'll send me the public address, and then I will send them a small transaction of like 0.0001 SOL or whatever to test it, and then say, okay, did you get that transaction? And it's kind of like due diligence stuff, like stuff that you do when you're doing OTC, you know, so that you don't get wrecked, things like that. And then once they confirm the address, then I calculate the amount of Atlas, send it to the team, say, okay, send this much Atlas to this address, and then the team sends it. There's a couple more things in there, but that's basically the gist of it. One thing we're trying to work on, because I've been somewhat concerned about like volatility. Like sometimes it can take a couple hours for the team, or maybe even longer for the team to, like, I could send the message, say, okay, hey, this guy, like, this is the current rate of Atlas. You got to send this many tokens to this guy. And then by the time the team gets it, it's a couple hours later. And then maybe when they send it, it's like 9 p.m. for the author's time. And then they don't actually see the Atlas till the next morning. And by that time, the dollar amount could like drastically change. So one of the things we discussed, because I've been kind of bringing this up the past couple of weeks, Signal had a great idea to, I think it was you, Signal, wasn't it? To coordinate the times?
Yeah, to prevent Atlas slippage being like a concern.
Yeah, and well, it's mostly the volatility, right? Because sometimes there's like big swings. I mean, within an hour or two, it's not that bad. But if you go like 12 plus hours, you know, and you just happen to get one of those really bad days, I mean, it can go in your favor too. But it, you know, we start getting into these longer periods of time, which are totally possible, just if things don't line up right. And if that happens to line up on one of those particularly bad days, like it could really be an issue, you know? So basically what Signal came up with was, we're hoping, we haven't got confirmation from the team yet, but we're going to try and see if there's a window, like maybe every Thursday or every Friday and every Monday between this o'clock and that o'clock, you know, maybe like a 6-hour window twice a week, that we can tell the author, like, hey, this is about when they're going to send the payments out. So if you're, you know, while you're waiting for your payment, just keep an eye during these times. So that way we're not getting those kind of like, you know, more so like random or uncoordinated payments, right? That could lead to some of those like big price discrepancies. So yeah, that's little stuff like that we're still working on, but for the most part, the foundation is set and it's safe. But no, we're not personally handling it. We're just kind of greasing the wheels as far as like giving the authors the information that they need, and then giving the team the information that they need as far as like, okay, hey, this is what this, like, we have to go and read the pip and say, okay, this is how much, like, it's being sent in 3 payments, one right now, one in 2 months, and then another one in 6 months. Like, we kind of, and we, you know, we write all that down and keep all that information and all that kind of stuff, so that it's kind of more seamless for everyone else, but we're not being like trusted with anything other than, I guess, information, right? Like, we're being trusted to facilitate that process. That's it, not with the money itself.
Yeah, the big thing we wanted to avoid, which was coming up recently, with like a couple of the PIP authors who had like approved PIPs requiring payment, was scenarios where we would pay someone and in, let's say, a less than coordinated way, where they know they're awaiting payment, and then they do get payment sent to them, but it takes them maybe a couple of hours to access the funds, or maybe a day or so to be able to get to where they need to be able to access them. And then let's say Atlas, you know, goes down 10%, you know, or 20%. And then they go, well, you didn't really pay me. Well, we did, you know, but now the market did its thing. The thing that we're looking to line up and create is we want you inside a window of predefined time to then tell us, when would you like to receive these funds? So that way we know the exact moment that we send them is coordinated with you. You're on the other side of the payment. You're there to either convert to USDC or hold an Atlas and just, you know, you take on the risks of the market at that point. But what we want to avoid is people taking on the risks of the market unintentionally, just because it took them too long to get to their funds or to be able to access them. Just lining things up in a more coordinated way that work for individual PIP authors.
Yeah, that's definitely necessary because, for example, in the first PIP with the meetup, like you have to pay the bills, and then if you go Atlas, then you make minus, and then if you really get wrecked like that, like with the 12 hours later or something, and then you lose 10% or something, it's like, yeah, then it's not nice. So I like the idea with the time schedules or whatever. So yeah, that goes seamless. Question to all. I don't know. It's basically done probably with the foundation. Do they keep a record of all the the bookings and stuff and the people? So basically, you do a KYC. You the author. You do a KYC, and then they have this in their books on the Bahamas or on the Caymans, or how does that work? Like, so
Yeah, that
For, like,
information
personal-
gets stored long term by the team. Meaning, like, so it's not like they burn it after the fact. If you did receive funds from the foundation, they do know who they paid long in case something pops up later where there's a need. To be able to identify the person.
Well, I think it's the foundation, right? Not the team. I think I
Yeah.
don't think the team has those KYCs. They might be able to get access to them if they needed to claw something back, or something weird were to happen. But the KYC itself goes to the foundation, and the foundation is not like, as long as your information checks out, then you're good. They're not like, I don't think they're, unless your password is from like North Korea or something, I don't think they're even going to look twice. It's
Yeah,
just as
also-
long as it's valid ID, they're going to be good to go,
also for the future, like with the foundation, the thing is like it's basically one person now, one foundation member. It was free before, and so do they share like is it the multisig? Do they share it with the team? Do you have any information with that, or is it solely in the foundation's director's hand at the moment? And is like
Well,
what's the plan for the future with this? Because it's like
For payments?
not and everything like with the foundation. And do we get more foundation members, or because
Yeah, I think
it's really
right-
weird,
I
like
think
when you
right
think about
now-
it, decentralized and all this, and then if
Oh,
it's just one
100%.
guy, you know what I mean? This kind of
I
thoughts.
think right now every single transaction or payment that happens is I think it's like it's a two-person multi-sig between the foundation director and Michael Wagner. I don't think I'm spoiling any trade secrets. With that, but meaning it's impossible for the foundation director to just randomly rug the treasury. And
Yeah.
it's also physically impossible for someone like Michael to, meaning it takes an independent legal entity and also the highest ranking person of Star Atlas, I think, to both turn the keys for that nuclear missile launch of anything leaving the
No,
treasury.
it's just like it's important for the DAO members to know how it works somehow, And then the other thought, I brought it up a few times here, is like, does the council or the DAO plan guidelines on for people who receive these payments? Because right now with our PIP, it's not that much of an issue. But if you look at example for Raspi's PIP, that's like more than $10,000, and then you get into all sorts of legal issues. I don't know how he does his stuff; it's his personal thing, but like we, for example, we have to pay bills, so we transfer this money to exchange, and then to a bank konto to pay the bills with that and stuff. So that this triggers certain things like taxes. If it's more than $10,000, like some weird, other things like all these money laundering laws and all kinds of stuff. So maybe it would be advisable, like, to give pip writers or authors some sort of guideline in the future. I don't know. Like, we probably not run into an issue by now, but I guess in the future this will come up a few times or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no,
Well,
it's
that's what
good guidance and it's a good idea.
that's largely what the foundation is for, is, you know, avoiding those legal pitfalls, right? Like, we're not lawyers, and so we wouldn't even really be able to know, like, you know, I know that different countries have different laws and thresholds as far as dollar amounts, but I wouldn't even know where to begin navigating that. But the foundation does. Like, that's literally what we pay them to do. But
Yeah, it's pretty much the foundation's entire responsibility is to make it so council doesn't have to be lawyers, for one, and two, to be an independent legal entity, which essentially acts as a point of neutrality and for the DAO for handling transactions. But I fully agree. In the case of Raspbies specifically, I think he's probably good, just because I don't think anything that he's getting, it's in the PIP itself, but none of it's leaving the ecosystem. So I don't think it'll ever hit any kind of traditional bank account. But that being said, it's 100% thing. There's going to be regulations in all kinds of different areas. It's going to evolve in crypto. I mean, it's not going to just be banking anymore. It'll start being on-chain things, especially if there's any way that anyone can identify it, you know, on-chain ownership or addresses or who owns what. Now, super good questions. We can bounce that to Foundation and try to get some kind of guidance on it. But yeah,
Yeah,
definitely
I'm super.
out of my depth legally.
Risingson's pip is also a good example for this. I'm super curious how he handles that, or he maybe creates some kind of company or some freelancer job and then receives payment from the Caymans. So it's super interesting, like how people handle this issue. Like, usually you would say you do it like the decentralized way and whatever, but it's kind of some
No, it's
people, like,
true.
they're probably more legit, and so it's kind of curious how to make it legit and, like, everything, like, bulletproof in terms of laws
100%.
and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I can tell
thanks.
you, at least from my experience with the council and DAO so far, and like I don't think I'm saying anything like trade secret here, but like when we talk about like legitimacy and legal foundations and all this other stuff, and you know how we're structured, um, like the DAO on our side, you know, the players, the council, etc. It's kind of like this. It was really just created by Xenor. You know, it was just people were bored and they wanted to just start the DAO up and give it some kind of functionality. So Xenor like updated some stuff on the website to make it possible for us to run and operate. Dan Park like rolled up a couple of pips for us to have like a structure to work with. But like I can tell you, at least on our side of the equation, you guys participating in governance, us participating in governance as council and individual voters. It's pretty much it's about as legitimate as a bunch of kids playing in a treehouse. You know, like we've it's the only thing that gives it the legitimacy is like the foundation itself. That's a real organization, like in the Caymans, with like a neutral legal director and all this other stuff. The fact that like their authority then ties back to high level team leadership, so like they can't do anything nefarious individually. But it's all kind of in this state of like forming and coalescing. And you know, like I think Mike Wagner and other people would be the first to tell you as well that like the DAO is nowhere even close to like
Yeah,
a finished
it's gonna.
project in its current state. We're like in what was it, like the Empire Strikes Back or whatever, when the Death Star is like half built. Do you see it in the background? You know,
It's
like
gonna be interesting at that point if the DAO really gets bigger and got more money. When the DAO starts to hire someone, hire people, I guess then it's gonna be like even more important, all this stuff.
oh, 100%. And building out that infrastructure is going to be critical and huge, especially if this whole thing is meant to be able to like take over SA one day. And you know, and like be able to handle that kind of stuff. And right now, like we approve like a picnic happening somewhere. Like we still have so many different hurdles and inefficiencies and things that we have to work through. Right? Just to be able to get people paid and taken care of. It's very much so building the spaceship while we're flying it in the form of the DAO at this current stage. I mean, it's cool. I mean, the first council kind of built the foundation and gave us like the framework to be able to work with, along with Dan Park and the team. Now we're actually getting things done. People are getting paid. They're starting to do stuff. That's super cool. But we are still so much in our infancy. It's crazy in terms of how we're formally set up and operating.
Yeah, and honestly, it's not that it's actually kind of a good thing that things are slow right now as far as pips, because we didn't really have any pips pass in the first council. It was all like super foundational stuff, like the most basic things. So we had a lot to do. It was like a lot of quantity of things to do relative to right now. Like right now, there's not a lot to do, but the stuff that we are doing now is like so much more consequential as far as like things could go wrong. Like we're starting to send money out, so it's like it's got to be dialed in. We have to like keep track of how much money is in the DAO, like stuff like that. It's like that we have to learn how to do, stuff that we haven't really had to worry about yet is now just becoming a thing that we have to think about. So it's kind of a good thing in a way that there's not a ton to process, so that we can really dial in like the, kind of how we navigate through these new developments, so that when it does get more busy, we have good systems in place.
Yeah, each pip right now is kind of like a new lesson. It's like if you bought one of those new like $20,000-$30,000 Tesla robots, like, okay, cool, you have this thing, but like every new task that you kind of want to teach it, you really have to teach it. So like every new pip right now that kind of gets issued, makes it through the voting threshold and becomes like a successful yes vote enacted pip, it passes through everything. Creates an entirely new set of lessons based off of what it's asking for, what it's trying to accomplish, how payments have to be structured, what new things the DAO is going to have to be capable of supporting or doing or enacting just to make that PIP viable and functional. So it's like, it's very interesting right now where like every single thing that's going across the finish line is like, it's a new lesson that creates all new questions about, what's the legality of this? How do we handle that? How is this going to be approached? Okay, this one has like a multi-tiered payment structure. How do we even begin to navigate that? Like, how should it be written? How should it be enacted? So yeah, Bodhi's right that like, if all of a sudden it was like a shotgun blast and we had just had like 100 pips out of nowhere flying across the finish line, like yeah, we just wouldn't have the scalar capacity, to handle it anyway. But like more so, we wouldn't have the experience as a DAO ecosystem in terms of we'd be making mistakes left and right, all over the place, because these are all new things. These are all new things that like the DAO hasn't processed before, hasn't encountered before. So it's kind of cool. Like if you think of it like a diet, and like each new pip is like, okay, here's a carrot, here's a hot dog, here's a hamburger. Like each one of these is like the first time the DAO has eaten that kind of food, for lack of a better term. It's all very new, and we're learning from each one of them. We're learning, the foundation is learning, Automata is learning. Every single time a new pip gets approved right now, because none of them are quite exactly alike, and they all have these different requirements.
Yeah, we went through a lot of the hypotheticals in the first council of like the different pip structures and how to accommodate them as far as like a you know, processing the pip and like, getting it to a vote. But now we're actually getting them voted on and like having them pass, and like I don't know. It's just yeah. I definitely feel like it's honestly a pretty good thing that it's kind of being a little slower right now, because I think I've said I think I've said like 3 times in the last couple weeks, like, well, there's another lesson, like it's been a pretty common occurrence actually.
It feels like daily it comes up as like a new thing that we've learned and we lock into a process. It's okay. Well, now we're going to need to accomplish this instead of that. What makes this one different? What new process do we need? What new standard do we need? How do we need to update the knowledge base or the code base or the standards being given to people? Well, at the same time, making sure that, we're getting people good results at a reasonable pace, making sure people are being paid well, things are progressing forward, and we're still driving activity, and getting people participating.
I also thought about all this because, like, there's a difference between net and I don't know the English word, before tax and after tax. So if you're creating a PIP, and then you don't know what you're doing, and then you put a lot of work in, and then you get the money, and then you realize you have to pay taxes on that, and then you should have
Mhm.
known before you create the PIP and everything. So all this kind of stuff. Probably gonna interesting to see like how people are gonna handle it.
Yeah, delivery of these things is going to be really interesting too. And yeah, like for instance, like you brought up like Raspy's PIP for like content creation. It's more than $10,000. It also has like this multi-tiered payment structure thing where essentially he's going to seek funding extensions via future proposals. Is like how it works out. Like 60 days after, if it passes, 60 days after that, he would then come to the community with a new proposal for funding extension, showing everything he's created so far, what's happening, get ideas and feedback from the community, support, criticism, whatever have you. And he would need the community to vote for like a new extension so he can keep moving forward doing what he's doing. But there's a lot of interesting things that pop up when you have proposals or ideas that have costs beyond just 5% of the ecosystem fund or 10 million Atlas, or they're more complex than that. They create these really interesting conversations about how that all has to be structured and made to work. In the case of his, the conclusion was all of this future stuff has to be its own proposal. So if he's seeking additional funding to continue making this documentary or all these other things, in 60 days, he'll have to present a whole new thing to the community, essentially showing, here's everything I've done so far. Here's all the progress. Here's how funds have been spent. Here's what we're seeking, for the next stage of it.
Is there a limit, like for example, like the 5% of the ecosystem, or like if there's long-term PIPs, like is there, like, let's say you get funding like 1 million Atlas a month or something? Is there a limit for how long this can go, or
Yes, it's currently 1 year. It's
year?
impossible for any recurring payment style proposal to operate for beyond a year without some kind of additional new vote. So even like
Yeah, it makes sense.
DAOcasters, like we encountered this, like if we created like DAOcasters as a role and we had paid content creators and this whole program set up, one of the problems that came up with it was, okay, cool. Well, we create this role and we've got these content creators and they get paid, to do these different things to help grow the ecosystem and do promotion. Like that's all well and good and cool, but there's nothing in here that actually, if this PIP got enacted, there's nothing that actually ends it. So it's in violation of that 1 year, structure. So then you have to like bake all these, I don't want to say convoluted, but more complex things into the PIP to make it compliant with that. So in the case of DAOcasters, it can't just keep running on its own. It will, like every 6 months, a new proposal will have to go up for funding to continue the program. So if the community ever decides not to extend it, it'll just stop. Because we can't create anything that goes forever.
But it's not possible, like you create a pip for 6 months and it got voted on, and then after 3 months I come in and create a pip to stop that pip. That's not possible, right?
No, not that. Well, put it this way. I haven't seen it, and we'd have to consider even the consequences of that. So if you had a pip to do something, it's actually a pretty wild thing to theory craft about. Like you essentially got approval for it to be doing work for 6 months. So the community supported you doing it. Someone else submits a pip to stop what you're doing. I'm trying to think of a scenario where the community would vote for your thing to be stopped.
Yeah, for example, like we see the guy just leaves, but he still has the pip, so he still gets
Right.
paid every month, right? So then people could
I
come up
think
and
it would
say,
work.
"You have to
I think you could file a pip to shut
but
down
then
another
you get
pip.
I don't think that's good, because then you could like also like somebody like who doesn't like you or got enough friends, and then they could say, no, we don't like the videos you do or something, we want you to stop. Does that make sense? I don't know.
It does. The only thing that I'm hanging on to in it that makes me think it would work is at the end of the day, the community decides both. Like the same way that a PIP gets approved, if someone got something approved and then another PIP was raised up later to shut it down, and then the community approved to shut it down, then it seems like to some degree that's the DAO working. That's the will of the voters.
That's interesting.
But it's interesting because, right, you would need the community to approve the first one first. So first the community agreed that they wanted to do this. And then in the second case, you would need the community to also fully support shutting down the thing that they just approved.
It's not the community, it's the police power, and what
Oh, it's
Falco
true.
says, like later on, like I don't know if we get regional DAOs at some point and all this, but it's interesting, like if you could overturn something, or if the PIP is there for 6 months, it's solid, or it can be like take down by another PIP. Kind of interesting.
It is interesting. Yeah, I haven't really thought about it, but at least my preliminary thoughts would be, if the community votes yes, and then later decides to vote no, who are we to say they're not allowed to vote no? Later. I think it's something that could be viable.
Well, and if an author is, putting themselves in a position to, if they're gonna break payments up over the course of 6 months like that, you would hope that they would be doing that for the benefit of the to not because they need it, right? Like if they're like, oh, I'm spending this money out of pocket today and go ahead and give me back in 6 months, like that's irresponsible on their part. So if they end up something ends up happening, that's on them, like if they're doing it to make the pit more attractive and they're fine with, they have the margin or they're holding the Atlas or whatever, like they're not worried about, getting the money right now to pay back like a contractor that they just paid yesterday or something like that, then that's great. You know what I mean? But they shouldn't be doing that to a point where they're putting themselves at risk in the first place. You know what I mean? Because that's not, the PIP getting voted to a halt isn't the only thing that could go wrong over the course of a 6-month period.
I'm more asking, like, if there's some rules, like, of course, our foundation thing, the first pips and stuff, that is all like it's the constitution. It's not like finished, right? Like we have to add more things in the future to that, and so it's going to be interesting, like if something like that would made it instead this thing. So things like, because it's really weird, like
I would imagine that anything that was prohibitively difficult to stop, like you're saying, like took more than 51%, for example, to stop it, it would also I mean, it makes sense. It would be reasonable, in my opinion, to also have it be required to have more than 51% to get it started in the first place. Like, if you're going to make a PIP that says, okay, I'm getting paid no matter what for the next 6 months, and you can't stop it, you know what I mean? Then you should probably have a super majority to begin with to even get that thing going. You know what I'm saying? Like, you shouldn't it like that's basically what a constitution is. It's difficult to get the laws into place, and it's difficult to change them after the fact as well.
Yeah,
It's just
you could ask for the full payment beforehand, or something like that. But I just wanted to ask if it's possible that like we could stop something like that. Like if Signal said 1 year is the maximum, so after 3 months we see nothing happens or something, and could we then create a PIP to cancel that payment? That's the question.
I think we
Yeah, for
could.
sure.
Yeah, it's good to know. I didn't know. I never but yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think about it, but like theoretically, I mean, pretty much anything that we can pass with like a proposal, like could happen. Like you could file a PIP and it could amend other PIPs. Like we talked about that when we founded the Constitution, right? Like in the founding PIPs, we're like, well, this isn't super clear. We could change this or we could change that. And everyone said at that time, like, well, okay, if we need to change something, we'll just file a PIP for like an amendment later. So theoretically, if you can do that, there should be such a thing as like an anti-PIP, where you could file a proposal that essentially is meant to terminate another proposal. I don't see any reason why you couldn't. Just comes down to what the circumstances are that people would approve something and right, then they would unapprove it. But yeah,
Could I make a PIP to get a new council election, for example? I could not, right?
yeah,
I could.
I think you could.
It's interesting.
There are limitations.
I can't see why you couldn't.
Well, it would be at some point if you start brushing up against PIPs that affect the what's it called? Like not the process. What's the word for it? It's like the way like for example, the ecosystem fund, like that's like a very fundamental PIP that greatly impacts the overall way that the DAO is, works, right? So those pips generally, they just if it's brushing up against something like that, like that can just be vetoed by the team essentially right off the bat. So it's not like every pip, every idea can go through. Like if you just wanted to say, hey, we just want to get rid of council tomorrow, and that's it, then that's probably not going to happen. You know what I mean? But I mean, if you have a genuine grievance and there's an issue and like, it does become kind of a gray area in some things, but as far as like funding, like ecosystem fund stuff or stopping ecosystem fund stuff, yeah, that's all fair game.
Yeah, I also thought in terms of if we hire people can be fired, and it's also something like if we hire a programmer or something or an artist or whatever, like that's always the contract would be always limited to 1 year, right? Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I just keep coming back to the fact that, really theoretically, when you think about it, like the DAO only exists because a series of PIPs were introduced and the community voted on them and approved them. Like theoretically, now we could just say that some things are practical and some things are not practical, but theoretically, the only reason that we have a DAO at all is because some proposals were submitted and the community and the team voted for them. Then, to happen. And I don't know. I think you could do any of that. You could, now granted, you might get pushback, or also you might the team has like a pretty large percentage of like locked polis and PvP. Like they might have like 30% of the vote, or something. That's a lot to overcome if they didn't want something to pass. But the only reason we have a DAO at all is because all of you voted to have a DAO and for it to work the way that it currently works. I think theoretically you could propose just about anything. You could propose to amend the things that founded the DAO. You could propose new council elections. I mean, maybe they don't actually pass, or maybe the team actually votes against it, because right now I think they stay out of things with their locked PvP. They could just show up and nuke, one side of the vote, and shut things down that way. But theoretically, the whole DAO, it only exists because we voted for it to exist, and we voted for it to exist the way that it does. I'm intrigued by a lot of these things. I think theoretically you could vote for there not to be a DAO at all. You could introduce a proposal. I don't think anyone would vote for it, because why? What would be the point of all their locked polis? If there's no DAO.
It's always 51% or 50+%, right? Or is it like 2/3 or something in certain situations, or everything is 50%, right? Every vote.
I'm not sure that we actually have one.
Currently, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So, in theory, if there was a vote and 41% of people, or let's say 30% of people said yes, and 10% of people said no, and 60% of people abstained, the vote wouldn't pass, even though yes.
Oh yeah, no. Yeah, it's a majority on the yes or no side wins.
Yeah, so it's weird. It's like, not that you would think in a big thing that you'd have that big of an abstaining, but technically if 2% said yes and 1% said no, and 3% or 97% said abstain, then the 2% would win.
Right.
Yeah, if you have a constitution, would it make sense to write something like in the constitution? So you need 3/4 or 75% to change the constitution or something? Would that make sense? Or
you could
generally,
it could just shut down a lot of things.
Generally, with the constitution, well, I was just saying, you normally you don't really it's very fundamental stuff, so you wouldn't put a lot of things through the process, and you would make it prohibitively difficult to avoid a lot of things going through that process, because once they're in the constitution, they're by design supposed to be stuck, right? Like that's the whole point of a constitution. So generally the way that it's done, in government, is it requires both a supermajority. So it requires, let's call it 75%. It's not exactly that in politics, but it's similar. It's akin to that. But it also requires a minimum amount of votes too. So just because you have 75%, if only half the people show up to vote, that doesn't matter. You have to have both. So that's generally the way it works. So yeah,
that's why I'm asking if you have something like that, or if it would make sense to have some things in the DAO make more bulletproof, or something like that. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, my idea was just, I've been wanting to do this for a while. I wanted to, instead of making a whole, a bunch of, a whole bunch of, policies that went into this, right? I just wanted to make a single policy that said, this is the Constitution, and anything that goes into this Constitution requires a supermajority and a minimum amount of, I forget the name, a minimum amount percentage of the votes to get into this constitution, and it similarly, like whatever's in there, if you want to bypass it or take it away or change it, like we're talking about, it would require the same level of voting, and that would be that the constitution would be the first example of requiring that level, but that would be it. That would be those specifications, and that ability to put items into that list would be the only thing that I would put in the list initially, rather than saying, okay, this is constitutional amendment number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 right off the bat. Just say, hey, this is an area this is a part of the DAO that's hard to get into and it's hard to get out of, and that's it. Like, that's the first vote. I think that could be beneficial, because then if somebody did have an idea that was, very foundational, they could vote for that particular idea separately, to go through. Like, for example, the ecosystem fund, for example, could get passed into that vote. We could say, okay, that's not really the best example because it's already kind of locked into it to an extent, but something like if somebody had trying to think of an example. It's hard to even come up with an example, but that's how it should be.
It's a good example. Like, could I create a pip and say stop the ecosystem fund and like save all the money or something?
Well, right now, no.
I think you could. I just don't think anybody would want to vote for it. Like, and granted, maybe that's philosophy because we haven't defined these things or said that you can't do them officially in our founding pips. So
no, they're definitely. I don't know if it's in the pips themselves.
Like, we didn't put into our pips that you're not allowed to create a proposal that changes these proposals or how the DAO works. In fact, we founded the DAO with proposals.
Right, but what I'm saying is, we're not fully decentralized, right? There's a level of centralization in veto control, and there are things that are just off the table completely. Like, it wouldn't matter if you had everybody in the community in support of it. Like, it's just not going to happen. Like for example, gameplay. You can't put a pip that says release whatever we have for combat right now, and however good it is, we want it today. Like, you can't.
Well, you just can't. We don't have the authority as the DAO to do it at all anyway. Like, even if we went to our founding pips, the founding pips make it clear that we don't have any authority to do that.
Yeah, there's a couple of them, and I forget the name, but I think it's like the processes or something like that. Like, very fundamental ways that the DAO works. Like, for example, you couldn't say we only need 30% of the vote to pass a pip, or we need 75% for every single pip to pass. You can't change the fundamental way that the DAO works with a pip. So even doing something like a constitution is borderline because you're introducing a totally new mechanic that changes the way that the DAO works. Generally speaking, those things are off the table, but there are certain things that are an improvement just subjectively. So there is some gray area, but for the most part, you can't change like the way that it works under the underlying way that the DAO works. You can, within the confines of how the DAO works, you can do whatever you want, basically.
It would be cool though. Now off of talking with VB, I've got all kinds of crazy ideas. I want to see some really wild proposals.
It's interesting. Like, I know the team has the majority still, and they always can veto and stuff like that. But for the future, it's like kind of interesting. Like maybe some things, some aspects of the DAO should be locked behind a higher threshold or something. Maybe that's in the future. It's interesting for sure.
Yeah, I think about it sometimes where, like, you could do something like that. You could try to create voting measures and like super majorities and all this other stuff. But like, I think the end result of it would be that everybody would lose more often. Is just you've got a contentious pip. One group of people really, really wants to see something happen. Another group really, really doesn't want to see it happen. They're battling back and forth. They're campaigning against each other. They vote. And then one group wins at like 50% to like 45% or something like that, and 5% abstain. But it didn't hit like a 65% supermajority. Both
I,
sides, like essentially, like nobody really got it. Just invalidated the whole outcome,
okay.
of the battle. Or like, imagine if we did that with like president in the United States. Like, someone had 51%, someone had 49%. So there's no president.
Yeah, it's just what Falco said. Like, does our DAO, like the Startless DAO, then trickle down to the other DAOs? Like, if we get regional DAOs and faction DAOs or whatever, does that trickle down the rules? I say, because in the like we're gonna get in if we get
The DAO that we're
regional
currently
DAOs.
participating in is the highest DAO, that affects like the whole
So
ecosystem. But no,
yeah,
I believe in-game DAOs and things like that later will be able
will be
to. They'll essentially
different,
be
huh?
created with their own rules and their own things, and it
But
wouldn't be common or make any sense for, at least not often, for anything to really come up at this level that impacts. You might like set rules for how those DAOs operate at this level, like general frameworks, but
yeah.
no, I don't think it's just that the framework of this is going to carry to in-game DAOs. I think they'll have their own rules and setups,
Yeah, but
largely
in the
created by.
end, if you get enough police, then you could like change the in-game DAOs with this DAO, right? With the DAO we have now.
Yeah, right. I think the end goal is eventually you could change anything, everything, control everything with this DAO that we have now. It's not there today, but meaning, yeah, I would imagine, and like the future that I imagine is there's nothing in this game that can't be decided, changed, or altered later by polis and voting. So last I checked, it's like 5 cents. When I looked out the window, scoop some up, guys. Don't complain. Don't complain later when it's $1 and you don't have much voting power. About how the
Yeah,
DAO
that
decided to
was
change something.
imagine like the pips we see now, and then imagine Atlas at 10 cents, and then you think like, oh, we're paying 25 million for something.
It'd be like Bitcoin
Uh,
for pizza. People would look back at it like people did like Iris Bounty the Feast, and they'd be like, "Oh my
That's why I
god."
mean, it's kind
Yeah.
of sad to see, Like I
Yeah.
thought, like, oh my God, 20 million
Yeah.
Atlas. That's like
The German
10
meetup
cents,
cost $10 million.
so something like that. And I'm like, oh shit, maybe it's a failure to spend it now. That's why I said like it's like, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, there's different schools of thought in that. Like that came up with like PipX back in the day. Like everyone said, like don't spend Atlas because it's low right now, so it doesn't make any sense. But like also like here we are 2 years later and it's even lower. So my personal school of thought on it is I think if we just sit on tokens and don't do anything with them and don't try to grow things, expand the ecosystem, get in front of people, make an impact, do stuff. I think if we just sit here and wait for the tokens to save us by themselves, I don't think that's a good strategy because the tokens could just keep going lower. They could,
yeah.
and then
It's like
later the
somebody
treasury's
bought the
worth like
pizza with the Bitcoin.
$100,000. Right. And then later the treasury's worth like $100,000. And now you really can't do anything with it. And you wish that you did something when it was worth 2 million.
No, it
I
was
think,
just a funny
yeah.
thought. It's not like
Oh
I
no,
understand that
100%.
fully. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm big on like right now, like I think I pulled up like the revenue and financials for like the DAO trailing 4 months. So DAO took in like roughly $60,000 in the past 4 weeks. We are so far away from even coming close to just spending the money that we're taking in every month. Like we're not even close to scratching the surface of we're not spending anywhere near enough money just to spend what we're earning, let alone touching our treasury balance. The treasury is growing while we're approving things. I think the biggest risk to the DAO and to Star Atlas in terms of what polis holders are doing and what voters are doing personally is I think the biggest risk is that we don't do enough things. Not that we do too much right now. Because I'm just not seeing enough proposals, enough measures, enough people with big ideas where it's like, wow, we really got to watch our spending. I think it's more the other way. Like, man, we need to kick some people in the butt, and get some ideas out there, how we're going to do things. With that, guys, we're coming up on just after 4:00. We didn't have our usual slideshows, so we kind of just bounced right into office hours. Does anybody have anything else to bring up, rap about, talk about, while we're here?
I'm good personally.
Okay, well, in that case, thank you everyone for showing up. This was our weekly governance live stream for May 31st, Saturday, and thank you all for being here. Thanks so much, and have an incredible day.
See you guys. Thanks, Doug.
Yep. See you.